My name is Sergeant Dean Carter. I'm 37 years old and I've served in the United States Army for the last 15 years, stationed mostly out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I've been through desert heat, freezing night patrols, classified ops, and more budget meetings than I can count, but nothing prepared me for the email I got last Thursday morning. It was flagged urgent, mandatory appearance, no details, just a subject line command review. At first I thought it was a glitch, or maybe one of those performance check-ins. But when I showed up in uniform, they already had a chair waiting for me at the end of the table. Not across from them, not beside them. The end. Like a student who'd spoken out of turn. No one smiled. No one made eye contact. And when the major finally cleared his throat, I knew this wasn't a review. It was a verdict. They used the phrase operational overreach. Said I had acted outside my clearance. I blinked. Not because I didn't understand the words, I did. I just couldn't believe I was hearing them. I'd flagged a security flaw. A real one. The kind that could have cost lives. But instead of getting a handshake or even a damn follow-up question, I got a warning. They said my actions had undermined the chain of command, that I'd taken initiative without approval, that I should have trusted the system. Trust the system. I almost laughed, but my throat clenched up before it could leave my mouth. For years I lived by that system, ate by it, breathed by it, let it keep me from seeing my family for months at a time because I believed it worked. And the moment I acted to protect it from itself, that same system turned its back. They didn't ask why I did it. They didn't ask what I found. They already knew. They just didn't want it on paper. Didn't want someone like me holding the receipt. So they called it insubordination. Gave it a neat name. Boxed it up like it was misconduct. I didn't respond. Not at first. My hands were on my knees, jaw locked, breathing slow. 15 years of service and suddenly I was a threat. Not because I broke the rules, but because I followed a different one. The one that says you protect the people around you even when command won't. That was my real crime. They didn't suspend me. They didn't demote me. They did something worse. They erased me, quietly, internally, paperless. I was still wearing the uniform, but they'd already marked me as someone to watch, someone who asked the wrong questions. That's how it starts, not with a bang, but with a closed-door meeting, a few blank stares, and a line in your file that says something's off. And if you don't play it just right, you don't get to serve. You get to disappear. That morning, I didn't know what would happen next. I just knew something had broken. And I wasn't the one who broke it. It started with a glitch, not even a dramatic one, just a tiny line of code that didn't match. I was helping a junior tech sort through some comm logs when I noticed the coordinates weren't encrypting properly. Looked like a redundancy bug at first, something harmless, but when I ran it through our secure channel test, the ping hit live locations. At first I thought I'd messed up the test. Ran it again. Same result. That's when I realized our outgoing transmission logs had a leak. The encryption protocol wasn't holding on certain legacy systems. Every third location report could be traced within seconds by anyone watching the right nodes. I flagged it, documented it, sent it up through the proper chain. No reply. A day passed, then two. I followed up with CyberOps, tagged it urgent. The response came through a week later. Brief, dismissive. Not your scope, Sergeant. I stared at the message like it had been written in a different language. I wasn't asking for a medal. I was reporting a hole the size of a crater in our comms. So I tried again, reworded it, polished the memo. Attached logs, timestamps, packet traces, even a worst-case scenario breakdown. Sent it to Signals, then over to the data integrity team. Silence. One guy replied with a thumbs-up emoji. That was the sum total of the reaction to a live vulnerability that could expose unit positions. By week 3, I started feeling like I was talking to a wall. Everyone nodded politely. Nobody moved. It was like I'd walked into a room with the fire alarm blaring and everyone just kept sipping coffee. I overheard a lieutenant tell someone it was just Sergeant Carter being dramatic again. Apparently my concern for operational security was now considered overreacting. The weird part was none of them even denied the problem. They just didn't want to be the one to own it. Accountability in that place was like a hot potato. Everyone's job was to move it along without letting it cool in their lap. And since I wasn't part of ComSec officially, they figured they could ignore it without consequence. So I kept digging, quietly, ran comparative tests using archived traffic, found a pattern. The glitch had already replicated into field units. We were weeks away from deployment rotations and the logs were traceable in simulation. I wrote a detailed impact report, sealed it with my ID tag, walked it personally to the Intel Major's assistant. She smiled, said she'd pass it along. I knew she wouldn't. 2 days later, the same assistant asked if I could help reformat a presentation deck for the colonel's morale talk. That's the kind of firepower they wanted me to use. PowerPoint, not protocols. After that, I stopped trying to go through official channels, started logging everything on my own. created a private vault of system data not classified, just neglected. Every update, every warning, every test I ran that proved the issue was still alive. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just couldn't stomach the idea of some 19-year-old getting shelled in the field because we didn't want to admit our code was broken. What got me wasn't just the danger. It was the indifference, the shrug, the way people looked right past me like I was just background noise. I wasn't a part of the solution or the problem. I was the furniture. They didn't want my warning. They wanted my silence. I remember one officer saying that kind of vulnerability would take months to exploit, that even if it were real, the odds were slim, like that made it okay. Like a gamble with other people's lives was somehow justifiable if the math looked good on paper. That's the culture I was dealing with, where reputation mattered more than readiness. And the worst part was by that point I already knew how this would end. Not with a correction, not with a fix, but with a scapegoat. And all I had left was the choice of whether I'd let it be me. I reached a point where I couldn't sit on it any longer. That morning I skipped chow, locked my office door, and started piecing everything together. Logs, screenshots, transmission timelines, encryption comparisons, field impact simulations. I labeled each file, clearly marked the severity tiers, even built a visual map showing how the vulnerability had spread between unit systems. It wasn't elegant, but it was complete. I didn't ask anyone for permission. I knew damn well no one was going to give it. Once I had everything packed into one encrypted report, I composed the message, kept it direct, no fluff, addressed it to Colonel Halverson's secure inbox. That wasn't my chain of command. He wasn't even in my division. But he had clearance, and more importantly, he wasn't blind to risk. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I took a breath, read it one more time, then hit send. As soon as I did, I felt the tension drop into my chest like a weight. It was done. I couldn't unsend it. I didn't try to justify it to myself. The only thing I pictured in that moment were the guys out there depending on systems I knew were flawed. The next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. I just sat there watching the inbox, knowing someone upstairs would see my name and think I was reaching too far. Out of line. I knew what they'd say. Carter's going off script again. Always poking where he doesn't belong. But that was the thing. I did belong there. Because the people who were supposed to protect that data hadn't. I didn't feel brave. I felt clear. Like I'd stepped out of a fog and just decided to stop pretending everything was fine. This wasn't about rank. It wasn't about ego. It was about the truth. And the truth was, someone had to pull the brake. Someone had to say the quiet part out loud, even if it meant being the one they blamed later. I didn't care if they called it insubordination. I'd rather answer for speaking up than live with what could happen if I didn't. At some point, you stop waiting for someone to do the right thing. You just do it. And you brace for the storm that follows. 2 days after I hit send, I got called into a briefing room with no briefing. Just a sheet of paper and 3 officers who wouldn't look me in the eye. It wasn't a discussion. It was a decision already made. They said my actions had caused disruption, that I had created unnecessary confusion within the chain of command. No one mentioned the actual report. No one addressed the data, the risks, the evidence. It was like it never existed. The wording was clinical, internal behavioral concern, overreach of protocol. I asked them flat out if they'd read what I sent. Nobody answered. Just that same blank wall of rank and silence. I walked out with a formal reprimand on my record and no way to appeal. They didn't strip my uniform, but they made it clear I wasn't welcome in the room anymore. My clearance was downgraded. My inbox went quiet. People I used to mentor wouldn't meet my gaze in the hall. It was like watching your whole career dissolve without anyone having to say a word. The worst part wasn't the punishment. It was the erasure. Everything I'd done, everything I'd tried to protect, it didn't matter. The system didn't just ignore me. It made sure I vanished without noise. And the people I thought would stand up, the ones who knew I was right, they kept their heads down and played along. I wasn't angry in the loud way. It sat in my chest like lead, heavy and quiet. I wasn't shocked. I was just tired. Tired of watching loyalty be rewarded with suspicion. Tired of seeing courage recast as defiance. They needed a scapegoat, and I handed them one the moment I chose integrity over protocol. In that moment, I realized something that still burns. They weren't protecting the mission. They were protecting themselves. And in their world, the truth is dangerous if it comes from the wrong mouth. I was that mouth. And I paid the price. Not with a court-martial, not with a fight, but with silence. The kind that tells you the door behind you just locked for good. They didn't even let me finish out the week. Just a cold letter, a checklist, and a deadline to clear my locker by noon. I walked through the halls one last time, past the same posters about honor and vigilance, past the offices where no one looked up. It was quiet. Too quiet. like the whole place was trying to pretend it hadn't just turned its back on something that mattered. My boots didn't echo like they used to. The rhythm felt off, like the building itself wanted me gone. I didn't take much. A folder with old letters from home, a pair of dog tags I'd kept from a friend who didn't make it back, and a field notebook half full of things no one would ever read. But I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I left something behind. In the top drawer of my desk, tucked beneath a maintenance checklist, I placed a plain black USB drive. No labels. No markings, just a sliver of plastic and metal that held everything they chose to ignore. Logs, packet captures, the encryption flaw in detail, timestamps showing every attempt I made to alert them, the escalation path, who I copied, who replied, who didn't. I didn't send it to command. I didn't make a scene. That's not how this works. You want people to see the truth, you don't shove it in their face. You leave it where the right eyes will find it. I placed it in the drawer of a systems analyst named Morales. Quiet guy, smart, honest. One of the few people who still said good morning even when it stopped being cool to talk to me. He didn't see me do it. I didn't leave a note. Just the drive centered impossible to miss when he opened that drawer for his inspection checklist. If he cared enough to look, he'd see what I saw. And if he didn't, then none of them deserved the warning anyway. I walked out of there without turning around. No salute, no handshake. Just a silent exit from a place I once thought I'd retire from. The air felt different the moment I stepped outside. Colder but cleaner. Like I'd finally stopped breathing recycled lies. They thought they'd closed the book. Tied it up with paperwork and silence. But the truth doesn't stay buried. Not when it's been backed up, documented, time-stamped, and handed to someone with eyes to read. I wasn't trying to bring them down. I just wanted the right person to wake up before it was too late. I left them something they couldn't ignore. Whether they chose to see it or not, that was on them. My part was done. It didn't take long. Morales found the drive that same afternoon. He plugged it in expecting to check a routine log, but what he saw pulled the air out of the room. Every folder was named with precision. Each file time-stamped, cross-referenced, linked to actual operational timelines. It didn't look like a rant. It looked like evidence. By the time the fourth document opened, he wasn't alone. 2 analysts were leaning over his shoulder. One of them made a call without saying a word. Within an hour, the conference room on the 3rd floor was full. No slides, no briefings. Just a screen and a silence that deepened with every click. The encryption flaw was real. The timestamps matched mission windows. And worst of all, the alerts I'd sent were in the metadata clear as daylight. They had the proof. They had the chain. They had the trail of who knew and when. The silence after the last file loaded was louder than shouting. You could see it in their faces. They didn't just miss something. They buried it. Command called an emergency meeting the next morning. It wasn't open forum. It was lockdown mode. Phones off. Doors closed. The kind of meeting that doesn't go on the calendar. The same officers who wrote my reprimand sat in that room, hands folded, eyes tight. No one asked where the data came from. They knew. And they knew what it meant. For the first time, they weren't looking for who to blame. They were looking for how deep it had already gone. The USB didn't just reopen the case. It detonated the illusion that everything was fine. And once it was out, there was no shoving it back in the drawer. The call came at 7:43 a.m. I was pouring coffee into a chipped mug when the phone vibrated on the counter. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up. The voice on the other end didn't waste time. Direct, calm. Said he was from the Regional Security Command. Said my name had come up. That's all it took to snap me wide awake. He asked if I had a moment. I said I did. What followed didn't sound like an interrogation. It sounded like something else. He thanked me. Not in the rehearsed way officers sometimes do when reading off a citation. It was personal, sincere. He said the information I compiled prevented a multi-level breach from reaching live operations. That without it, entire unit rotations could have been compromised. I didn't know what to say. The same report that got me written up was now a case study in preemptive response. He mentioned my name had been included in the internal briefing to the top brass. That command had launched a formal audit and the findings were troubling. Then came the pause. The shift. He said they wanted to consult with me, not as a soldier, as a civilian advisor. Quiet role. No press. Just work. Real work. I stood there, hand on the counter, letting it land. All the silence. The cold shoulders. The looks that said I was out of line. Now the same people were quoting my file like it was gospel. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. But something in me straightened. Like a weight I'd been carrying finally let go. He asked if I was interested. I didn't answer right away. I just said I needed to think it over. But we both knew I already had. Not for them. for the mission, for the truth. For the people still counting on someone to see the cracks before they give way. Recognition doesn't fix everything, but it reminded me I wasn't crazy for caring. And sometimes that's enough. I walked back through those gates 6 weeks later. No uniform, no badge, just a contract and a clause that said I answered to no one but the directive itself. This time they didn't tell me where to sit. I picked my own seat. Open laptop, clean slate. The nameplate on the door didn't say rank. It said Systems Integrity Advisor. That was enough. The first thing I did was rerun the audit no one thought to complete. I didn't need a team. I needed access. And when they gave it, I found 3 new vulnerabilities that made the original flaw look like a paper cut. One was buried in a legacy satellite ping protocol. Another lived in a forgotten failover script no one had touched in years. The third was active live and leaking packet data during recon sweeps. Nobody had seen them, but I did. I flagged each one, documented them clean, submitted full diagnostics with solutions and contingency matrices. This time nobody questioned the format. Nobody asked me to water anything down. They forwarded it to the upper chain within hours. And when they held the review, they asked me to walk them through it. Not the techs, me. There were no interruptions, no performative nods, just silence and the scratching of pens. The general sat in the back, didn't say much, but he stayed the whole time. When I finished, they didn't clap. They didn't need to. One of them just leaned forward and said the word that meant more than any medal ever could. Understood. I left that room without a salute, without a ceremony, but with something far more valuable. My name wasn't just back in the system, it was attached to change, lasting change. Reform proposals were already being drafted before I even shut my laptop. I didn't need to wear a patch to protect anyone anymore. My work spoke louder than any insignia ever did. That was the difference. I didn't come back because they asked. I came back because the work wasn't finished. And this time I was doing it on my terms. There was no ceremony, no framed certificate or standing ovation, just a plain envelope slipped under my door one morning. The paper inside was rough, the handwriting slow and pressed hard like each word had weight. It was from the colonel, the same man who signed off on my disciplinary action months earlier. He didn't say much, just that he'd read the files, said I was right and he hadn't seen it soon enough, said he regretted not listening when it could have made a difference. That was it. No excuses, no spin. Just a few lines and a name signed at the bottom. I never showed it to anyone. I didn't scan it or frame it. I folded it once and tucked it into the back of my wallet behind my ID. Some people carry photos. I carry that letter, not because I need the reminder, but because it proves you don't always need applause to know you did the right thing. Sometimes the silence after the storm says more than any medal ever could. What I learned after being erased is that silence can feel safer than the truth. But safety doesn't always mean integrity, and integrity rarely walks hand in hand with approval. Being loyal doesn't mean saying yes when something's broken. It means being brave enough to say what no one wants to hear even when your voice shakes. Especially then. I used to think doing the right thing would earn respect, that people would see it, recognize it, maybe even say thank you. But sometimes the people you're protecting are the last ones to understand what it cost you. And that's okay, because doing the right thing is not about reward. It's about staying true when it would be easier to disappear. If you're watching this and you're standing at that same edge wondering if it's worth it, I'll tell you what I wish someone told me. Be loud, be honest, even if it costs you. The recognition may never come from where you expect, but one day someone will pull that truth out of the rubble, and they'll see exactly who held the line when everyone else looked away.